From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Support comes from Vision Zero. On foot or behind the wheel, safety is a shared responsibility. And Vision Zero Louisville believes 0 roadway fatalities is the only acceptable amount. Their mission is to create safe roads by design, engineering solutions, and education. More information at visionzerolouisville.org.
Hi, I'm Richard Karn, and you may have seen me on TV talking about the world's #1 expandable garden hose. Well, the brand new Pocket Hose Copperhead with Pocket Pivot is here, and it's a total game changer. Old-fashioned hoses get kinks and creases at the spigot, but the Copperhead's Pocket Pivot swivels 360 degrees for full water flow and freedom to water with ease all around your home. When you're all done, this rust-proof anti-burst hose shrinks back down to pocket size for effortless handling and tidy storage. Plus, your super light and ultra-durable Pocket Hose Copperhead is backed with a 10-year warranty. What could be better than that? I'll tell you what, an exciting exclusive offer just for you. For a limited time, you can get a free Pocket Pivot and their 10-pattern sprayer with the purchase of any size Copperhead hose. Just text WATER to 64,000. That's WATER to 64,000 for your 2 free gifts with purchase. WATER to 64,000.
By texting 64,000, you agree to receive recurring automated marketing messages from Pocket Hose. Message and data rates may apply. No purchase required. Terms apply. Available at pockethose.com/terms.
Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. Have you ever wondered how your city decides what gets built and where? From zoning and development to public input and approval processes, city planning shapes the neighborhoods we live in. But the process isn't always easy to follow. Today, we're digging into how city development works and what happens when the public feels left out. Later in the show, we'll talk with Jeff O'Brien, the executive director of the Louisville Metro Cabinet for Economic Development, to help us understand how these decisions are made and where community voices fit in. But first, we're starting with something that unfolded recently here in Louisville. A proposal to build a large tennis and pickleball complex in Joe Creason Park sparked strong pushback from neighbors and raised questions about transparency and how public spaces are managed. To help us break down what happened, we're joined by Morgan Watkins, a reporter with Louisville Public Media's Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting. Morgan covers health and the environment and has been following this story closely. Morgan, welcome to On Track.
Thanks.
Can you walk us through what the Joe Creason Park proposal was all about? Like, what exactly was being planned there, and how did that controversy first start?
So the plan was to build a tennis and pickleball facility on a portion of Joe Creason Park, which is a publicly owned park run by Louisville Metro government. The idea was that a nonprofit group would build this $65 million development there, and it would be a place that they could have attract tournaments, have just local people could come and play, etc. The project got officially announced earlier this year, and it pretty quickly sparked a wave of pushback from local residents they had a variety of concerns, and it really ranged in terms of, some people who spoke out live right around the park. Other people did not live close by, but used the park or just really liked it. And their concerns sort of ranged from a variety of things. People who lived nearby were concerned about parking and traffic kind of becoming an issue, which it's already an issue there sometimes when the zoo is having big stuff. But they also there were a lot of people who were upset about the idea of building a development that's sort of privately developed by a nonprofit on public land. That was a big issue. There's a nature preserve next door to the park that they were also concerned about, what would happen to the land stewarded by the Louisville Nature Center. It was a sort of a broad spectrum, a range of complaints about the project.
So like you said, this is a proposal for a private group to develop part of a public park. How does something like that even move forward? What's the process for approving private use of public land?
Well, in this case, you needed to get Metro government approval because you would have to. The idea in this case was that you'd have this nonprofit that would lease the land it was 25 acres of space. So the city would need to sign off on using parkland for that purpose. They would have to go through a different set of development, related approvals. There's different sorts of hoops that you have to jump through when you're proposing a development in the city, depending on the type of development it is. But it started with this letter of intent that was signed between the nonprofit and the mayor, Craig Greenberg, saying, this is something we're interested in pursuing. And that was kind of what set off, once it was formally announced, that's when you started to see people questioning how there was already sort of this beginning, shared interest between the city and this group. When did they start talking about it, that sort of thing. So there was also a lot of complaints coming from some folks about the process leading up to the first, public announcement.
Yeah, it sounds like many neighbors didn't find out about this proposal until it was already in motion. And it sounds like that sort of sparked this backlash. I mean, there was a strong grassroots response with lawn signs, petitions, neighborhood meetings. It all happened pretty quickly. That public outcry was so fast. What does that reaction really say about people's expectations for being included in decisions that affect their community, especially here in Louisville?
It certainly was an issue. I talked to a few people that I sort of just met when I was out at the one and only public meeting that was hosted on this, because then the mayor canceled the city's plans to do the project at Joe Creason. But I talked to some people who just said, maybe they were like, I'd probably still have an issue with this no matter what, because a lot of people I talked to really were bumping up against that idea of building a development that would have sort of some private use cases on public land. But they also were like, if the process had been different, if I had felt like we had gotten a chance to talk about the possibility of using the land for this purpose before it felt like it was, already happening, I might feel a little differently. But, the mayor came out and he said, that he wants to take some lessons from this about when public should be involved, how to get the public involved. And basically, but he kind of said, for him, this was supposed to be the starting point for conversations, but that he, recognized that it clearly did not feel that way or seem that way to a lot of people who felt like this was happening.
Is there usually a set stage in this process, or is it really just case by case basis when public should have input? Or is this sort of still kind of, they're still kind of trying to figure that out with proposals like these?
I think it depends on the kind of development that's being proposed. Is it the kind of thing where you need to do rezoning, that kind of stuff? I'm not an expert on the city's development process, but I know that there are typically trigger points for when public input needs to be, brought in. In this case, it seemed, there public documents, records that we obtained at the Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting and that other folks obtained as well, including Tom Fitzgerald, a local environmental attorney. Those sort of indicated that this was something that had been on the city's radar for some time in, private conversations, which I don't think is unusual, but it certainly bothered some folks that something could, get to the point where a nonprofit's announcing these big plans and people are saying, wait, can we talk about, this earlier? Although the flip side argument is, well, we're talking about it now that we have a formal proposal to put forward. Yeah.
So what was the conclusion to the Joe Creason project? What ended up happening?
Well, local residents really kind of circled the wagons on this. There were a couple of Facebook groups where people were doing a lot of organizing. People got together, there were yard signs, there were lots of, letters to council members, to the mayor, a lot of public, doing interviews with different news outlets. And basically they really circled the wagons, made a big push against this. The planned developers had a public meeting as part of their agreed plan of attack with the city was, okay, we're first going to have a couple of, meetings for the community to come and learn about this project. Well, I went to the first one that they had set, and people opposed to the project showed up in force. They were protesting outside. People came inside with some, signs saying, "We reject your proposal," and sort of made a stand there. Although I did talk to, one person at least at that meeting. Obviously, I didn't talk to nearly everyone there, but I did talk to one person who was excited about it. He's an avid tennis player, was really excited to see a development like this come. So it wasn't purely oppositional, but that was clearly the largest group contingent there were several hundred people opposed to this project. They were chanting. They made how they felt very apparent. And there was another meeting that was supposed to be planned for that weekend. And instead, the day before, the mayor called a press conference at Joe Creason Park and announced that the city was moving away from this. The city would not be pursuing its, interest in having the developer build this at Joe Creason, because basically he said he had heard what people said. It was clear that there was a lot of discomfort with this among residents, and he was, taking that to heart and was not going to pursue this. And the developer says that they're looking for somewhere else to go. The nonprofit is going to be looking elsewhere to see if they can, do this in a different place. But basically, the mayor backed down on this in light of resident pushback, and there were people who were opposed to the project who came out for the press conference, which was announced pretty hastily, and they were cheered. They were really hyped about it.
So this case is closed, and it sounds like the people's voice was heard.
Yes, although it's interesting, folks who were involved said that they want to keep the momentum going in terms of talking about how can we make improvements at Joe Creason that we love so much. They say they want to be vigilant about other possible attempts to develop public parkland in ways that maybe aren't supported by residents. And the mayor says, they're still looking to do this kind of a project somewhere in Louisville.
Well, Morgan, thank you for your time today on Track.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Morgan Watkins covers health and environmental issues for Louisville Public Media's Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting, and she's been closely following the Joe Creason Park story. When we come back, we'll talk with Jeff O'Brien, the executive director of the Louisville Metro Cabinet for Economic Development, to help us better understand the process for city development. You're on Track with Louisville Public Media.
Hi, I'm Richard Karn, and you may have seen me on TV talking about the world's #1 expandable garden hose. Well, the brand new Pocket Hose Copperhead with Pocket Pivot is here, and it's a total game changer. Old-fashioned hoses get kinks and creases at the spigot, but the Copperhead's Pocket Pivot swivels 360 degrees for full water flow and freedom to water with ease all around your home. When you're all done, this rust-proof anti-burst hose shrinks back down to pocket size for effortless handling and tidy storage. Plus, your super light and ultra-durable Pocket Hose Copperhead is backed with a 10-year warranty. What could be better than that? I'll tell you what, an exciting exclusive offer just for you. For a limited time, you can get a free Pocket Pivot and their 10-pattern sprayer with the purchase of any size Copperhead hose. Just text WATER to 64,000. That's WATER to 64,000 for your 2 free gifts with purchase. WATER to 64,000.
By texting 64,000, you agree to receive recurring automated marketing messages from Pocket Hose. Message and data rates may apply. No purchase required. Terms apply. Available at pockethose.com/terms.
Welcome back to On Track. We've been talking about public space, transparency, and community input, and now we're turning our attention to how this city development actually happens, from zoning to planning to public feedback. Joining us now is Jeff O'Brien, Executive Director of Louisville Metro's Cabinet for Economic Development. He's worked in community and economic development for over 20 years in both Kentucky and Illinois. He's helped lead major planning and development efforts in Louisville, overseeing departments like housing planning and code enforcement. He holds degrees in geography and urban planning from the University of Iowa, and he's a member of the American Planning Association, the American Institute of Certified Planners, and the Urban Land Institute. Jeff, thanks for joining us on Track today.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
So where do new development projects even start? Are they usually driven by the city, developers, or community needs, or a mix of a bit of all of these?
Yeah, really, usually development is started by a private property owner or a developer that's looking to start a project. It's very rare that the city is directly involved in real estate development. Those, of course, are very high-profile cases because they involve public land. But usually developments come to us from a private group looking to start a project in Louisville, and they're looking at what are the community needs, what does the economy, what's the economy going to bear out, but it's very rarely brought upon by the city.
So is it kind of like, I know this is a silly question, but it's kind of like Shark Tank, they're coming and they're pitching to the city, or how do they do this?
Yeah, I think, really what our land use and development processes in this country, it's really a grand bargain with property owners. I mean, we are a very property rights focused country. That was kind of how we were founded, of course, trying to escape the challenges that were going on in Europe in the 1600s. And so I think that this has always been a property rights focused country. And in the 1920s, there was a series of cases and projects that ultimately brought about a Supreme Court case that legalized zoning across the United States. And really, people often see zoning ordinances as ways for communities to say no to development projects, but really it's a way for cities to say yes to certain type of land uses. It is a land use regulation regime, and there are a number of hoops the developer needs to jump through in order to get approval, whether that's a small-scale residential project, like I want to build a detached garage on my property, or whether I want to build a large multi-story mixed-use development. So it really does come at us from that angle, where we're taking those requests coming to us and evaluating them against our regulations.
So I'm curious then on the zoning part, like where does zoning come into that development process? And for those who maybe not be familiar with zoning, what exactly is it, and why is it so important for how a city grows?
Yeah, zoning is really a way in which we organize and regulate land use. So we try to keep the theory originally was we try to keep the noxious industrial uses away from the more sensitive residential uses, and that's the way zoning regulates. We have different zoning classifications for single-family development, for multifamily development, commercial development, and industrial development, and that's sort of broken down over time. It's seen as maybe not a great practice. In fact, a lot of our beloved urban neighborhoods, like, say, the Highlands or Germantown, could not be built under our current zoning regulations. So that's one of the things that we try to look at. And zoning really comes into the play. Zoning really tells us what a property owner can do with their land. So that sets out a possibility. And if somebody wants to change what they can do with their land, there's a whole process of that they can go through in order to change that zoning.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because in my neighborhood, I also see like places that are residential and business, and they're all in one, which is something and somewhat unique from my perspective to Louisville.
Yeah.
And I think it's just really fascinating. So how does the city then decide? So you get pitched these projects. How does the city decide which kinds of projects to prioritize as part of its development goals, or where the city wants to go with Louisville? Yeah.
So for the run-of-the-mill development project, and I don't mean to mischaracterize any development project, but for the average development project, it really is a first come, first serve. So the way that we docket cases on our planning commission or our board of zoning adjustment, it really is who was the first one to submit. When was that case first ready to go? Or if they're just submitting a construction permit to do a small remodel in their kitchen, it's when does that permit come in, and what order in the stack is that permit? So in terms of that, that's how a routine development project goes. When we talk about development projects that maybe want city incentives or they want city land, then we're going to look at what our priorities are. And we're going to look at, number one, what are the mayor's priorities for housing, for example? What are the mayor's priorities for development? And those priorities are set either by the administration or by the Metro Council through the budgeting process. And I think that we'll evaluate those projects based on those priorities.
So incentives, are you talking about like things that the city's put out as, like, I know there's like there was a film incentive that kind of would be prioritized based on what the city's looking to do?
Yeah, so the film incentive actually comes from the state. But yeah, so if the right now there's been a lot of talk about incentivizing urban infill housing and how how do we meet our housing demand and use areas of our community that have already been developed, and so therefore there's less environmental impact and already have the adequate transportation and sewer infrastructure. So that's how we start to build around programs on, are we going to support a project using funding through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, or are we going to support a project using tax increment financing? Are they bringing these aspects that we want, in terms of what we're hearing from both the administration, the Metro Council, and the state legislature as well?
So there's a lot of different aspects in how the city's laid out and all these different processes. Given how interconnected all of this is, what role does your cabinet play in coordinating development decisions across departments like planning, housing, code enforcement?
Yeah, it really comes down to, again, the routine development project. There's usually, we have a set of processes that people come through, and they are either meeting our building codes, our zoning requirements, our housing requirements, or they're not. And then we try to massage the projects to fit within those regulations. And most of the time, we're able to get those projects to some level of approval. So oftentimes we'll hear a concern that the Planning Commission approves projects in the high 90%. So 97, 98% of the time, a project that's going in front of the Planning Commission gets approved. And that's because there's been a lot of work on the front end with the development staff, both on my team and at our partner agencies like the Metropolitan Sewer District or the Louisville Water Company, to massage the project to meet our regulations and get it ready in a state where it can be approved by the Planning Commission. There are a number of projects that won't meet those standards, and they never even make it to the Planning Commission. So that's why you see that approval rate so high from time to time.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And so, I mean, I know this is me being a 101er on the zoning stuff. I know sometimes things need to be rezoned. How does that kind of come into play?
Yeah, so the rezoning all falls, we have to have a document called a comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan is a document for, really we call it we call that a guide, not a straitjacket. So the comprehensive plan is a set of policies that we use to determine whether or not a piece of property should be rezoned or can be rezoned. So that guides us. That's kind of the first level of review. The next level of review is, does the zoning change meet the requirements in our land development code? And so that's where there's a hard set of standards. You have to be so close to this zoning district. You have to be adjacent to this other zoning district. And that's really how we make a final determination, how the Planning Commission and ultimately the Metro Council make a decision on, is a piece of property rezoned or not. Okay, we've talked about priorities, kind of process. What kind of development projects require a public hearing or a community notice? Yeah. So if we have a rezoning case, that's going to require a public notice. If we have a conditional use permit, which is something that's permitted in the zoning ordinance but has some additional standards and additional community review, that also requires a public hearing. Something like a subdivision, and this is a very subtle difference that not a lot of people understand, requires a public meeting, but it's not a public hearing. And it's like a rezoning is a discretionary review, so it is totally at the city's discretion, and by the city I mean the Metro Council's discretion, if they want to change the zoning ordinance or not. The zoning ordinance has two components. It has a map, which is often what we think about the rezoning, and then the text, which is the regulations which guide what can happen in those zoning districts. And so when we change the map of the zoning ordinance, that's the rezoning. That requires legislative change. That requires a public hearing. That's the most intense thing we do, and we have the ultimate discretion to say yes or no. So if we are going to say yes to that rezoning, there might be a number of infrastructure changes that we need. We need a roadway improved. We need a sewer line extended. The city can say yes to all those sorts of things. On a subdivision, where we've had very many subdivisions that have been very controversial and have required large public meetings, we have very much less discretion in those cases. We require, while we require certain improvements, if the development meets our standards, the Planning Commission really has no choice but to approve it. So we've had a few cases where we've had a lot of people in the room very upset about a single-family subdivision, and why can't you stop this project from being approved? Well, it met all the standards. It didn't need any variances. There wasn't any discretion, and therefore, by our regulations, we needed to approve that development. And so that's kind of the level of review we get into. And so that review can go between the public meeting to the public hearing, depending on the level of case. Most cases that we have that require new commercial buildings, big expansions to commercial buildings, rezonings. Those are going to require public hearings in front of our planning commission or one of the committees of the planning commission.
Is it safe to say it's kind of looking at it from more of a commercial perspective would be like a legislative, and more residential would be like more of this kind of like neighborhood meeting?
Yeah. And again, we the neighborhood meeting is kind of an additional piece that we put out there to get developers and neighborhoods to work together on their projects. But the public, I'm more speaking in the formal realm of approval. So when we get into those cases, if it's a single family home, there's not much notice. There's not usually a public hearing required unless there's a variance. They need a smaller setback than they currently have. So it really is like the type of case, and we can require a public hearing just about for anything depending on what's being asked for. But generally thinking, the larger the project, the more intense the public engagement process is.
So in light of the outcome of the Joe Creason Park proposal, for that one, at what point does the public typically have a chance to share feedback in the development of a process like that? Because that's a little different, right? In that it's like public land, or does that process, we've sort of talked about that process does vary?
Yeah. So Joe Creason, we were nowhere near going into the formal zoning process for that project. Really, that project, we had a proposal that was brought to the city to do a development on private land, and we went back and forth for a long time over how best to approach this process and when would be the best time to get public engagement and public feedback. And I think that there were a lot of lessons that we can learn from that. But at the end of the day, I think where we were in that process was really at a point of getting community feedback about how that project felt. Was this a good use, in fact, for the park? Ultimately, the city decided not to move forward with that given the level of public feedback that we'd received.
And that was development on public land, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So I'm curious, too, on other development aspects with the little time we have. But I'm really excited to talk to you about this and get through this process. It's really interesting to hear how it is all broken down. For you, what do you think is meaningful public engagement in this process from your perspective? How can residents make their voices heard effectively? Yeah,
first and foremost, I think when you get the notice card, when you see the sign, the public hearing signs, if you see a news blast in your council newsletter, hear from your neighbors that, hey, there's a zoning hearing coming up, I think going to those hearings is very important. I think the most important time to give feedback is anytime there's a point to engage. But what I tell developers when they're coming to us is I think the neighborhood meeting point and process. So big rezoning, not everything requires a neighborhood meeting, but the big rezoning cases do require neighborhood meetings. I do think that those neighborhood meetings are the key point to participate. And we've tried to institute better ways to get that feedback back to the staff, and so that we can work with that developer and massage that project into something that is more palatable for the city and more palatable for the neighborhood. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's what that meeting is there for. But really, I think the earlier that people can participate, the better. So those you're talking about the neighborhood association meetings and things. Yes. And is there a big presence of that you work with, especially because I know I've been to a few and some are smaller, some are bigger. Do they exist in most of the city? Yeah, we have neighborhood associations across the city, whether it's a big neighborhood association like we have for our big urban neighborhoods, like the Bonnie Castle Neighborhood Association or the Cherokee Triangle Neighborhood Association. And then we have the homeowners associations that exist throughout the suburban areas. So there are hundreds, if not thousands of neighborhood associations that exist throughout this community that are focused on hyper-local areas in the community. And again, for Metro government, we're a county-wide organization. We're looking at all approximately 400 square miles of Jefferson County. And I think that, while we're looking at the global scale, it's really the neighbors that know best about, the way that streets interact in their neighborhoods and the way stormwater runs off their properties and into the streets and sewers. So it's really important to bring that detailed information to the staff and to the Planning Commission as a project is weaving its way through that process. Well, Jeff, I really appreciate your time here with us on Track today. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Aisha. I really appreciate it.
Jeff O'Brien is the Executive Director of Louisville Metro's Cabinet for Economic Development. And earlier we heard from Morgan Watkins, a reporter covering health and environmental issues for Louisville Public Media's Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. Our music is by Kojin Toshiro. If you're just tuning in and you want to hear the full show, you can find it now at LouisvilleOnTrack.org or in your favorite podcast app. And let's continue the conversation. Is there something you want to hear about? Something that matters to your Kentuckiana experience? Let us know by sending us a text or giving us a call at 502-814-TALK or send an email to ontrack@lpm.org. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and remember, being kind is free. That's the start of community. Until next time, you're on track with Louisville Public Media.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. What do you know about oil and natural gas? You likely associate them with running your car or heating your home. But these two natural resources fuel so much more than that. More than 6,000 consumer products that we rely on every day are made using oil and gas. Before you even step out the door in the morning, you've already used more products made possible because of oil and gas than you realize. From the toothpaste you brush your teeth with, the soap you washed your face with, and the sheets you slept on. Not to mention your makeup, contact lenses, clothes, and shoes. Oil and gas are vital parts of all these products and so many more. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.